What is going on, Metaverse? Annie here with Annie Knows, and I'm here to give you the recap of the great debate of the century earlier today that happened with Kieran from Illuvium and Michael Wagner from Star Atlas. So for those that missed it, it was a very interesting setup. Kegi had the two CEOs come on, fairly unstructured, and so what I thought I could do is add a little bit of context to what we thought we heard from the debate. And overall, I've got three core substantive issues that I think came up during the discussion. The first one is difference between the Web 3 and Web 2 approaches to building. And I think you see this as two fundamental approaches, one that's being used by Illuvium versus one that's being used by Star Atlas. And I'll explain what I mean here. So the Web 2 approach is where you would generally build out the product, launch the game, and then sell assets afterwards, sell skins. But basically, it's a content-first, community-second approach. In contrast, though, Star Atlas is taking a very Web 3 type of approach to building their game that I would say has really been pioneered more by examples like Otherside and Yuga Labs, where they're trying to build the community first, including by selling assets and then developing the game later over time. And so I think this is an interesting distinction. I don't know if there's an answer yet as to which is going to be the optimal way to build in the future and if both can work. What I do know is I think some of the main reasons for the tension in the dialogue is if you are a game developer and you choose to sell NFTs beforehand to the community and the game doesn't actually launch with utility, obviously, that's the definition of a scam or a rug. And so I think it's a fair question to ask, what's the likelihood that we have of a particular game launching? Otherwise, you do have that risk that a game may not come to fruition. That said, I think there was some good discussion and back and forth between the two founders. But this, in my mind, is one of the main underlying tensions that we saw between the visions of the two builders. The second key element is the in-house versus outsourced developer model. And in this case, I think you saw the questions from Kieran on how many developers do you have within the Star Atlas community. And based on that discussion, there's a different approach that Star Atlas is taking compared to most game developers. In general, an in-house development studio is going to hire 90-95% of the people working on the project, and they'll then bring their staffing level up through contractors or an external partnership to fill in whatever specific gap is still left after the in-house developers can't cover the overall scope. Their approach has been more of an outsourced from the beginning model based on what Michael shared with us earlier today. Fundamentally, I think both can work. The question is, do you need to maintain the developers long term for the success of the project or not? And I think that's another question that, we need to see. I didn't really feel like we got a good answer on, because if we're looking at a 5 to 7 year timeline, presumably it would make more sense to have those development teams in-house so that they can continue building for much longer time horizon that we've seen with Star Atlas. But I'm not, I think when you look at the overall approach, if you don't have that knowledge and don't want to pay for specific elements, whether it's solidity or otherwise, you certainly can outsource different elements of the model to different, sub-development studios or your individuals over time. So I think that in-house versus outsourced development model is another one of those substantive differences between the two projects that we heard. And then the last one is the release approach. And I think this is actually a discussion that's been waging, as I know, in the Illuvium community, where the question, do you take a modular launch approach or a feature complete launch, is still an open-ended one. And, Star Atlas has indicated, obviously, because they have such a long time horizon, they want to get content out to their player base. And so therefore, they'll take iterative steps and build a, let's say, simpler point and click type of game that can be used for the first year or so with the assets in parallel while the overall main MMO type of game is being developed. Illuvium is still having this discussion within their DAO overall. There's been discussions on both sides. I've given the feedback that, my recommendation is to have a feature complete game at launch in a recent Twitter thread. I'll try and post a link to that in the description below so you can take a look at it. But I do think this is maybe a personal difference between Kieran and Michael on modular versus feature complete launches. So, overall, as far as the wrap up, I think the moderation left a little bit to be desired, and we in the Web3 gaming space would be much better off if we had true substantive discussions about some of these underlying premises and base philosophical approaches. That said, I think the advantage that we see here is being able to build and have open discussions in a transparent way in public is critical, because this sort of a dialogue would never take place in a Web2 gaming studio concept. It would have gotten stopped by any of 100 different layers between the legal teams and the marketing teams and product teams before either of these CEOs had a chance to even engage with the public. And so I do think this is a positive for the space overall, and look forward to seeing and hearing more discussions in the future. So now you know what Annie knows about the debate of the century.